What if Mendeecees Harris Jr.'s child finally decided to discuss the family strife that fans have been witnessing for years? The connection between Yandy Smith, Mendeecees Harris, and his children has never been simple. Yandy's involvement is presently being questioned, though, because of a new set of problems. Was Lil Mendeecees really trying to protect and build a family, or did she perceive that his father was being pressured to make choices that changed his environment? He revealed Yandy's alleged exploitation and manipulation of Mendeecees, as stated in the title. What was actually spoken, what was caught on camera, and what is only speculation on the internet? We're analyzing the history, the conflict within the family, the conflicting opinions, and the situations that left viewers wondering what was really happening behind the scenes today. You could view this family story very differently once it's all finished. Le Chattel, #Yandy Smith, #Mendeecees, love and hip-hop, #reality TV for years. Yandy Smith Harris and Mendeecees Harris seem to be a blended family in front of the cameras. But Mendeecees Jr.'s story was far more complicated, concealed beneath that image. Yandy's difficult relationship with his biological mother, Samantha Wallace. At this time, Lil Mendeecees' perspective becomes vital. He revealed Yandy's mistreatment and manipulation of his father, as the title suggests. However, the current material does not demonstrate that Lil Mendeecees made that specific accusation. In public, he has spoken something far more personal. How the fight between Yandy and his mother affected him as a youngster. That difference completely changes the storyline. Because instead of fabricating a shocking surprise, we may investigate what Lil Mendeecees actually endured. Mendeecees Jr. remembered watching the infamous fight between Yandy and his mother on television, according to a 2023 report on a Love and Hip-Hop Reflection segment. He explained that he was young when he saw the incident and that it was difficult to realize that his friends may have seen it as well. Imagine watching fights between adults in your own family on national television as a child. Imagine yourself going to school after that. Your friends know what happened. They hold certain beliefs. They could ask. You still have to get along with the people involved, too. That is a very different experience from what consumers see on television. For spectators, it could just be another dramatic scene on reality TV. A child in such family may remember it for years to come. Lil Mendeecees reportedly acknowledged that. He also stated how difficult it was to know how to deal with Yandy when she and his biological mother were at conflict. He confided in Yandy that he didn't know how to handle his stepmother when they disagreed. That statement is powerful because it shows how adult conflict may mislead children. He saw more than simply a fight between two women. He couldn't decide between two important individuals in his life. His mother was on one side, Yandy was another. His father, Mendeecees, was also the center of attention for the entire family. This suggests that every argument has consequences for people other than the persons involved. This is one of the reasons the blended family storyline in Love and Hip-Hop became so significant. After Mendeecees had children with other women, Yandy eventually became the stepmother of his oldest son. Media sources state that Yandy's relationship with Lil Mendeecees underwent a significant transformation over time. Yandy has openly declared that she learned a different kind of love from Lil Mendeecees. She became interested in Mendeecees' life before having her own children with him. As a result, the connection is more complex than the simple stepmother versus birth mother narrative that reality TV sometimes features. There was genuine affection, but there was also conflict, and those two things could coexist. A child may love a stepmother and have a close relationship with his biological mother. It is conceivable for a stepmother to disagree with the child's mother while yet demonstrating compassion for the youngster. A dad could also be caught between his family members. This is where the charge of manipulation in the title must be handled with caution. There is no concrete evidence in the sources I studied that Lil Mendeecees publicly accused Yandy of manipulating his father. We do have evidence that the family conflict had a direct effect on him. It could also be more enlightening. Because the most important story isn't usually what someone allegedly did to another adult. It was what the children endured while the adults quarreled. The bond between Yandy and Lil Mendeecees appears to have evolved over time. In 2022, He and Yandy attended the Head Eyes Awards and appeared in public together. Yandy gave him a compliment and described their relationship in extremely affectionate terms. In 2023, the two publicly rehashed their previous disagreement. That is crucial, because it suggests that whatever happened in the past did not permanently destroy their connection. Instead, the story takes an unexpected turn when they eventually reached a point where they could be open about the traumatic memories. Now, the young man who had previously struggled to understand how to deal with Yandy could sit down with her and talk about the harm those family arguments had caused him. That isn't necessarily a story of dishonesty. It is a story about growing up. It's a story about family. It's also a story about managing complicated relationships when the people involved are always visible to the public. But there is still one crucial question. Given how clearly he remembers the confrontation, what did Lil Mendeecees actually think of his father's handling of the situation? Did seeing his parents and stepmother resolve such disputes alter his opinion of his family? Because that's where the next chapter becomes even more fascinating. However, another facet of Lil Mendeecees' story further muddies the label. You would assume that Mendeecees Jr. suddenly exposed Yandy and accused her of manipulating his father based only on the headline. The publicly available data, however, paints a more nuanced picture. In fact, one of the most insightful moments was when Lil Mendeecees talked about his relationship with Yandy. He talked on how difficult it had been to grow up with his mother and Yandy at odds. He discussed the uncertainty of being divided between two important persons in his life, rather than presenting himself as someone who just hated Yandy. And it changes everything. Because saying, Yandy manipulated my father, is not the same as saying, I was affected by the conflict between my mother and Yandy. The former is a serious accusation. An individual's experience is the second. And the information we have supports the second, not the first. However, this is where the story starts to become intriguing. Lil Mendeecees eventually matured to the point where he could see things from his own perspective. When he was younger, he had little control on the behavior of the adults in his immediate surroundings. He had no influence over the disagreements. He had no control over what was broadcast on television or what his friends would think of the show. All he could do was find his position. That is a difficult circumstance for any child. It is also considerably more challenging when the family turmoil is viewed by millions of people. Despite those unpleasant encounters, Lil Mendeecees and Yandy eventually became friends. The public has known about that connection for years. Lil Mendeecees stated in a 2023 report that Yandy had raised him throughout his entire childhood. According to the same report, he told Yandy, "You're not my mom," as a practical joke. The joke quickly became sentimental because Yandy took their relationship so seriously. Think about that for a moment. If Yandy had merely been an outsider to him, why would a joke about rejecting her as a mother figure have such an emotional impact? Their relationship was crucial, which is why the joke worked. Yandy had assumed a position of authority in his life. She had helped raise him. She had spent a good deal of his early years with him. Even when they were joking, there was an obvious emotional bond between them. However, their relationship wasn't perfect. It doesn't prove that everyone always performed things correctly, nor does it fix the earlier problem. It does, however, show why the word manipulation should be used cautiously because the available data points to a complicated mixed family rather than a simple story in which one person controlled everyone else. Mendeecees has also publicly recognized the significant influence Yandy has on his life. Mendeecees said that he and Yandy had broken up in a 2025 interview, but he asserted that she had helped him mature and changed his outlook on life and family. Referring back to the title, that finding is important. Because if Yandy says that Mendeecees helped him grow and change his perspective on family, it will be more harder to demonstrate that he just exploited or used her. This does not, however, mean that their relationship was trouble-free. Clearly, it did. Their relationship has documented arguments, therapy sessions, disagreements, and difficult conversations. For example, during a recorded therapy session, Mendeecees allegedly became agitated when Yandy said she didn't feel enough appreciated. He eventually left the meeting as the argument became heated. That isn't a picture of a perfect collaboration. Two people who struggle to communicate are depicted in this picture. These difficulties are crucial because when a reality TV couple clashes, viewers may assume that one of them is controlling the other. Relationships, however, are usually more complex than that. There might be misunderstandings. One may harbor resentment. There can be different expectations. It is conceivable for history to remain unresolved. Furthermore, it can still be challenging for two people who genuinely love each other to reach a consensus. For this reason, Lil Mendeecees' perspective is intriguing. He wasn't only watching from the sidelines of a relationship. The family that resulted from that union reared him. He was affected by the disputes between his parents. Years later, however, he remained in contact with Yandy. But he doesn't have to agree with all she did. He is still allowed to follow his own convictions. Furthermore, it does not indicate that the family was pain-free. It just shows that the reality is more complex than the viral title suggests. Another detail makes this much more fascinating. Yandy and Mendeecees have maintained a public relationship for many years despite romantic problems and periods of separation. However, in light of current events, supporters' views of their history have changed. Mendeecees said in late 2025 that he and Yandy had split up and that their televised marriage had never been formally consummated. He said that the relationship had lasted for around 20 years and acknowledged Yandy for helping to mold him into the person he is today. Now, fans are reflecting. They are re-examining previous events, arguments, accusations, and family conflicts. Additionally, they want to know if the warning signs existed from the start. However, we must be careful there. Just because you know how a relationship ended doesn't mean that it was always manipulative. Relationships just evolve with time. Individuals grow. Priorities change. Lastly, two people who had previously built a life together decide they are no longer in accord. Because of this, Lil Mendeecees' story may be less about exposing Yandy and more about understanding what it was like to grow up in a household that was constantly in the public eye. And if music is the real story, the question that follows becomes much more important. How does Lil Mendeecees feel about his father's relationship with Yandy now that he is old enough to see the entire situation for himself? Because more might be revealed by that point of view than by any viral headline. The story takes a whole different turn now that Mendeecees has formally confirmed the split from Yandy. In December 2025, Mendeecees admitted that he and Yandy had been apart for about a year. He also revealed that despite their wedding ceremonies being shown on television, they were never legally wed. That revelation immediately changed fans' opinions of their whole relationship. For years, viewers saw Yandy and Mendeecees present themselves as a committed couple. Their relationship withstood a number of arguments, family conflict, pressure from reality TV, and imprisonment. Then, fans were suddenly told that the relationship had already ended. The breakup wasn't even the most surprising part. Mendeecees subsequently said so about Yandy. Instead of blaming Yandy of manipulating him, Mendeecees recognized Yandy's contribution to his growth. He asserted that she had changed his outlook on life and family after he had known her for around 20 years. He said that their friendship had aided in his development and that he would not be the person he is now without her influence. Think about the importance of that statement. The viral headline suggests that Lil Mendeecees exposed Yandy for taking advantage of his father, despite the fact that Mendeecees publicly said that Yandy had improved his life. Those two tales have nothing to do with one another. For this reason, this story requires context. Maybe Yandy erred. Mendeecees could have made a mistake. Maybe certain elements of their relationship became difficult. But there's no evidence that Lil Mendeecees publicly accused Yandy of lying to his father. It does show a family that had complicated emotions throughout the years. And now, after the split, those earlier times are being reassessed. Mendeecees said that their relationship ultimately ended because they couldn't agree. That explanation is far different from a grandiose claim that one person just controlled the other. Even if two people are really fond of each other, they could not get along. Conflicting expectations may occasionally arise over years spent together. Furthermore, a successful relationship may no longer be suitable for the two parties. This is how Mendeecees appears to have described his situation. But Yandy's answer added another level. Following Mendeecees' public declaration of their divorce, Yandy made enigmatic comments on social media that many followers assumed were connected to the breakup. One sermon focused on recognizing the difference between those who people knew her business even though she didn't inform them. Yandy did not name Mendeecees directly, thus fans were left to interpret those posts. Was she responding to his interview? Was she only expressing her feelings? Or did the conversations have nothing to do with each other? We don't know. And that's another important lesson about celebrity narratives. A cryptic post can spawn thousands of possibilities, but until the author defines its intent, they remain guesses. Meanwhile, the family itself has endured in spite of the breakup. Yandy and Mendeecees have reportedly kept up their co-parenting of their kids. This suggests that when their romantic relationship ends, their bond does not. They still have responsibilities. Their ancestry is intact. Furthermore, their children will always be a part of them. This brings us back to Lil Mendeecees, because his perspective may be one of the most complex of all. As a child, he witnessed his father start a life with Yandy. His biological mother was likewise active in the larger family dynamic, and he saw the struggle between those adults while he was still figuring out where he fit in. Nevertheless, despite all, he seemed to have maintained a friendship with Yandy. That is crucial, because if he truly believed she had just tricked his father, we would need hard evidence that he stated that. Without that evidence, the headline remains a theatrical interpretation. This disclosure has not been confirmed. Perhaps the most striking thing about Mendeecees' most recent comments is that he did not describe Yandy as someone who ruined his life. He said that she was the one who transformed him. The divide does not disappear as a result. It does not mean that everything was perfect. Moreover, Mendeecees and Yandy weren't always right. It only suggests that their 20-year story cannot be sufficiently summed up in a single assertion. There were prosperous years. Suffering lasted for years. The family was at odds with one another. There were public arguments. There were times when the focus was on growth. There was eventually a separation. The narrative is still unresolved, though. In actuality, more recent Love and Hip Hop Atlanta coverage shows Mendeecees trying to figure out what kind of relationship he can have with Yandy after their breakup. In one recent episode, he seemed to desire to rekindle a friendship rather than immediately return to a romantic relationship. But Yandy was still confused by what seemed to be contradictory messages. It raises the next important question. If Mendeecees wants Yandy in his life, even though he no longer wants the relationship, what does it mean for their family? Can they end up being friends? Could they effectively co-parent? Or will their complicated past force them to continue having the same disputes? Because when a relationship ends, the drama doesn't always stop. Sometimes it's the start of the real story. The story becomes much more engrossing at this point. Because Lil Mendeecees was more than simply a young child seeing his parents from a distance. The family arrangement he was growing up in was challenging even before the cameras arrived. One of Mendeecees' children from previous marriages was Lil Mendeecees, but Yandy later became an important part of his life as a father. Because of this, Lil Mendeecees faced a circumstance that many children from mixed households can identify with. Liking several people without having to choose one over the other. His biological mother was Samantha. His father was Mendeecees. Yandy also began to become an important part of his everyday family life. The problem was the arguments amongst the adults. The reality TV narrative used Yandy and Samantha's earlier dispute. Furthermore, Lil Mendeecees later talked about how difficult it was for him to understand how he was supposed to deal with Yandy amid the fight